Americans on the home front. This is our fifth lecture on World War One, and this is going to specifically cover what things were like back home while our soldiers are getting drafted and are going off to war. We had some things in this country that were a little different. We, as a nation, participated in the sacrifice as opposed to just the guys who were going over to fight. We had to change some things. Boy, those people are really packed in that street. Look at this. There must have been a sale on those hats too. Look at they're all wearing the same hat. All right, Americans on the home front. So, how did we pay for the war? Wars are expensive. Wars are also very good for the economy down the road because it puts the war machine into effect. The factories become basically war machines. Our government needs to be able to pay for sending our guys off to war, and so they launched a vigorous campaign so that the American people could feel like they were part of this effort. So they sold something called Liberty Bonds. Liberty Bonds were bonds purchased by Americans that could later be redeemed for the original sale value plus interest. So this gave you a chance to buy a Liberty Bond. Let's say it was $5. So many years from now, you can cash that Liberty Bond in and you would get your $5 back plus whatever interest built up on that. So maybe you get $10 back or $12 back. But for an original investment of $5, you made money, you just had to wait to get it. And the government collected that money and then used it to help pay for the war. So you can see one of our campaign posters trying to get people to buy Liberty Bonds. Well, it worked. You can see that the selling of Liberty Bonds raised more than $20 billion for our government. It paid for about a quarter of the total United States war costs. And it also gave us money to loan out to our allies and eventually get that money back with interest. So we also had to manage the economy during this time frame. Like I said, factories turned into war production machines. So they're making less goods for the American consumer and more for our soldiers. So Wilson, President Woodrow Wilson, sets up a huge bureaucracy to manage the process of switching industrial production to war production. So he created some new agencies. That's what bureaucracy is. It's part of the government that is going to be set up to just specifically work on a particular goal. Within this bureaucracy, he created the War Industries Board, whose job was to oversee the nation's war-related production. You can see the War Industry Board trying to tell you not to waste because we need stuff that we generally use and just throw away as Americans. That stuff could better be served right now, making things for our soldiers. They were telling you to, be careful what you eat, how much you eat. Certain foods were not available because we needed to make sure the soldiers got these things. And you can see, the guys are going off to war, but a lot of women got jobs and helped make stuff for the war effort. Today, that wouldn't be such a abnormal thing, but back then, this was kind of earth-shattering. The War Trade Board was another agency created under Woodrow Wilson that oversaw foreign trade and punished firms suspected of dealing with the enemies. So, that we're still telling our companies, you can trade with people overseas, just make sure they're our friends. If they're not our friends, you're going to take a hit. You're going to somehow be fined or lose certain privileges. And the National War Labor Board settled any labor disputes that might disrupt the war effort. There were going to be issues with unions in these factories because, the factories are now turning into war machines. So this was something that was going to have to be settled. for the good of the cause, for the war effort. And you can see, together we can do it. We can roll up our sleeves, and the blue collar workers and the white collar workers, the labor with the blue collar, and the management, the white collar. Um, White collar workers are guys who tend to work behind a desk. Blue collar workers are the guys who get their hands dirty. And so together, through this labor board, we're gonna take care of what we have to take care of. We're gonna help our guys overseas. All positive, propaganda, trying to make sure that we're all on the same team and on the same page. So, as I said before, you had to regulate what you consumed in terms of food and fuel. The Lever Food and Fuel Control Act gave President Woodrow Wilson the power to manage production and distribution of foods and fuels vital to the war effort. Again, this is going to make certain things a little bit more scarce, which may also drive up the price, but it's also going to make sure that the guys overseas get the stuff that they need. Certain things that would be normal for us might be used to make certain weapons or supplies or uniforms or whatever our guys need overseas. Future President Herbert Hoover, he'll be coming soon. He will oversee the Food Administration to increase farm production and reduce waste. They could impose price controls and enforce rationing. This is the distributing of goods to consumers in a fixed amount, making sure that people are only getting what they need instead of what's too much. Now, the Fuel Administration sponsored gasless days to save fuel. Now, again, this is back in the 19 teens. So, we weren't dependent on cars like we are today. But they had days where they wouldn't sell gas. And so you weren't getting gas for your car, and we needed fuel for the war effort. This is also when we started to do something called daylight savings time, which um, now happens it's the end of October. And this is the situation. And then again in the spring, where we're turning our clocks ahead 1 hour for the summer, and then we turn it back 1 hour for the winter. The idea being that we're trying to use less electricity so that we have more natural daylight and when we can take advantage of it, and we'd have to turn on lights less. Enforcing loyalty is something that sounds like it should be under a dictatorship and not a democracy like we have. We were riding a very fine line as to, were we going to continue to be a strong democracy, or were we going to give in to the time and let the government have more power? Well, sometimes our fear for things drives our decision making. Our U.S. government imposed censorship on the press and banned some publications from the mail. Basically, what we're saying here is that they wanted the publicity coming out about the war to be positive. They wanted people behind the war effort. They didn't want anybody negative. They wanted our soldiers to have good morale, our families to have good morale, to feel good about what they were doing. The government challenged any media influences that threatened the war effort, because again, we all wanted to be on the same page. We're supporting our soldiers in this effort. We need to focus our anger toward the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians, the bad guys. The Committee on Public Information rallied public support for the war through short films, pamphlets, and posters. This is propaganda. You can see one of these groups that they put together through the Committee of on Public Information was called 4-Minute Men. And these guys would travel around and they would make 4-minute speeches to promote certain aspects of the war effort. Well, over a course of our history, we've had some issues with immigration. Remember, this is the nation that has the Statue of Liberty and bring us your huddled masses. Obviously, at this time, there's certain times in our history, like after 9/11 is another, time frame where we have a fear of certain foreigners. Now, during this time frame, we were worried about spying, espionage. Our government feared that secret agents might try to undermine the war effort by destroying transportation or communication networks. So it led to restrictions on immigration. The National Security League convinced Congress to pass a literacy test for immigrants. Now, this literacy test was not very difficult, and very few actually failed the test. But what this is doing is creating this anger and hatred towards certain ethnic groups. In this particular case, um, Germans and people who were on the team of Germany during World War One. And the war created a general hostility toward these Germans, and certain phrases like "hate the Hun" referring to the Germanic people, were very popular. And then you saw images like this: "Destroy this mad brute," and "enlist." The repression of civil liberties. Wilson claimed to be fighting for liberty and democracy, that disloyalty would be dealt with a firm hand of stern repression. And again, it's kind of a contradictory sentence, right? I mean, if we're free and independent and are part of a democracy where the will of the people is what should be, um, but we're also censoring our press, and we're restricting what you can and cannot do, and we are threatening you with negative consequences if you don't listen to us. We're also making you afraid of certain immigrant groups. 1917, Congress passed the Espionage Act, which made it illegal to interfere with the draft. Um, there were people who were fighting against the idea of being forced to fight for their country. Now, we today do not have a draft. We have a selective service system that is in place, but currently the draft is not active. The Espionage Act was amended a year later by something called the Sedition Act, which made it illegal to obstruct sale of Liberty bonds or to discuss anything disloyal, profane, or abusive about the American form of government, the Constitution, or the Army and Navy. Now, this is not a good thing. It sounds at the time it sounds good because you want everybody supporting the war effort, but this is the United States of America, and we have a Bill of Rights, and we have a Constitution that says that we, the people, um, have certain freedoms, like freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of religion and like all these freedoms that are guaranteed to us. But it seems like because of our panic of immigrants and of certain groups of immigrants and the war itself, the bad guys, the Germans, that at times in our history we have sacrificed rights for freedom, and at the time it feels right, but in the end it's really not a good thing.